Hello, everybody, and hello, Ron.
Hello, ma'am. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So we have gone live on YouTube, and I have Ron here tonight. We're going to be talking about dads and grief,
Mm.
that dads grieve too. And so if you are joining us live right here at the beginning, kind of waiting for us to get on, and you're there, go ahead and say hi so that we know you're here. Maybe let us know where you're watching from too. That's always fun to know where people are. And Ron, where are you? Are you in the DC area?
No, ma'am. I have relocated down to Tampa, Florida. I'm at that age
Oh,
where either I relocated or they came and got me in a bus. So I figured I'd come down voluntarily before they did.
okay. Yeah. All right. So, welcome to everybody. And I do want to introduce Ron before we get going here. And I know that we'll hear about his son and his story, but he did lose his son, his only child. And Ron has become a sought after speaker in the world of parental grief, but not just there, also in the corporate world, because he also speaks to businesses and corporations about grief in the workplace, and which is so needed. And
Oh,
Ron has written several books, and two of those books, I believe, are about dads and grief. Am I correct, Ron?
you are, ma'am. They very much are. My first two were directly for fathers
Okay, all
and who
right.
grew, basically.
Yeah. So I know that Ron has a lot of good things to share. We're going to be interacting here. If you have questions, go ahead and type them in, and we'll remind you as we go along, and we'll answer the questions as we go along. If we don't get to them as we're talking, then we'll make sure we answer them at the end if we do have any questions. So, Ron, go ahead and share some of your story with us and what's on your heart about dads and grief.
Well, I would, first coming through, not to timestamp it, but coming through May, we're just coming beyond Mother's Day. So certainly I'd like to wish a belated happy Mother's Day to moms that have angel kids, moms that have kids here on earth, to my own mother, God rest her soul, who's looking down on me now, but certainly a happy Mother's Day. And, as we come through May and then you present a program like this about, uh, men grieve too, we're coming up on Father's Day, and it certainly has a big implication for me because I lost my child in June, and I actually laid him to rest on Father's Day. So,
Oh, wow.
we talk about things that could create triggers or what have you. It's certainly one of my times of the year that not only the date that he passed, but the date that I laid him to rest happened to fall on Father's Day. And it has a great deal of joy for me now. I've progressed to the point where, John is so much in my heart and in my very being that, it means a lot, put it that way. But I tell you the story of him. He was born in 1997, but he was born with a heart condition called hypoplastic left heart syndrome, which in short means the left side of his heart had failed to develop in the womb. And the very day he was born, he was handed to us, and the doctors told us that he probably wouldn't make it through the night.
Mm.
He did, with God's help. God directed the number two pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon in the country, and back then I didn't know that they rated them. And being number two, I don't think I was looking for number one. Number two seemed to be pretty good.
Yeah.
And through a series of very agonizing and somewhat threatening, very threatening open heart surgeries, they rebuilt his heart to function the best it could on two chambers. He had depleted oxygen saturation, but his prognosis was for full life. We had no expectations that he would pass. He had a wonderful, wonderful life. He was my only child. Of course, I spoiled him and
Mm.
raised him up, and got a lot of humility out of going through a child that you couldn't tell that he was a special needs child, but he was. It was so much that I did just to make sure that he had everything that he needed in life. And he, unfortunately, he went in for a typical, nothing's typical, nothing's routine in medical procedures, but he went in for a heart catheterization. He'd been through them before, and it was exploratory, and something happened. And, when he was in recovery, his heart failed on him, and he just couldn't recover from that. And I take a great solace in knowing that I was actually there when my child took his last breath before he went to join God again. And it means so much to me, even to this day, that to know I was there. There are many of us that don't get that. And I got it. And God gave me that blessing. He gave me
Yeah, and
16
I'll
years.
just throw in there because I know that sometimes parents really struggle with that, and I'm one who wasn't there.
Yeah.
I felt like something. She was in the hospital. She was
Mhm.
supposed to get out the next morning, and I felt like just one of those mother's intuition things. It's like I need to get up there. Something
Yeah.
just wasn't sitting right with me, and she was a good hour away in Madison University Hospital, and it was while I was on the way that I got the call that her heart had stopped, and so I ended up there to see her body instead of her. And so, I'm one of those parents that didn't have that. I was on the way.
And that's
And
why I say, in a very humbling way, I realized how blessed that I was.
yeah,
It was something that I don't know how I would have responded had I been in your situation with that. It helped me make peace with it, as it were. There are so many other ways to make peace. That was just one of the ways that I did. So
right.
it helped quite a bit. Um, when I lost John, again, he was my only son. I kind of lost my identity. I didn't know who I was for a while. I ambled around like most of us do for several months after that. But part of the biggest, uh, really the biggest hiccup for me is I didn't know what I was. Was I still a father? And that was the biggest thing. Not only did I feel that I was a failure as a father, but I didn't know if I was even a father anymore.
Mhm.
Um, the inspiration for my first book, which I titled "Sometimes I Cry in the Shower," was God had sent John back to me 6 months after he passed, and he visited me of all places in the shower. I won't go into too much about what he said to me because some of it wasn't pretty. It was to the impact of how dare you not think that you're still my father.
Mm.
But some pretty profound things went through my head that day, including the fact that and if you'll forgive me, I was a Marine, and he said that to me, and he says, "What do you say about being a Marine?" Well, it's once a Marine, always a Marine.
Mm.
We're a cop. He said, "Will you always be a cop?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "If you ask any retired police officer now, they'll tell you that they'll be a cop for the rest of their lives." And my mother and father are both passed now, but was I still their son? Of course,
Mhm.
I was still their son. Everything that makes up me came from mom and dad. Everything about being a cop made up a part of me. Everything about being a Marine became a part of me. 16 years with my son. How dare I sit and think that I was not still his father? And I take a great deal of pride today being able to stand up and throw my arms way up in the air and say that I am the father of Jonathan Taylor Kelly. And
That
I'll
is
be able to say that until I see him again.
that is so good.
Yeah.
That's so good.
It's I was blessed to have God at least let him visit me that day. And like I said, it inspired me to begin writing. It inspired me to take a different path and to get out of that thing that we talk about. And hopefully you and I'll talk about some tonight. I was stuck thinking that maybe I was wrong in my grief because I wasn't openly crying like others were.
Mm.
Was there something wrong with me? I looked at my spouse at the time who was debilitated, always in tears. I was a man. I was systemizing and organizing. I was arranging his funeral services. I was doing everything that I could to stay busy.
Mhm.
But then I had to look at myself and say, was there something wrong with me because I was not despondent? I was not at the point where I couldn't function anymore. I was still going. I was still doing. And then it hit me when I finally asked myself, did I not love my child as much as I thought that I did?
Mm.
And at that point, I had to stop and I had to go back and take a look at who I really am, not just Ron Kelly, but me as a male and what made me do the things that I do. And the amazing part of it, and again, hopefully we'll discuss it tonight, was I came out of it knowing that I'm okay. I
Mhm.
was who I was wired to be. Um, Today, I'll tell you that anybody, unless they're doing something to harm themselves or others, own your grief. Don't let anybody else tell you what you have to do. You do it yourself. And again, you'll come through it. Just make sure you're not hurting yourself or other people. And yeah, then you need a little extracurricular help on that. But the bottom line is you're okay. All right. It's not a bad thing that you're not doing what you see somebody else doing. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. And
We
that's
get
I
so
think
much of
that's
that.
probably those of us who have been on this path a while, I think that's one of the main messages that we try to get through to those who are in the fresh grief
Mhm.
is, don't compare yourselves to how you've heard other people grieving. Don't
No.
let other people tell you how you should or shouldn't be grieving, especially if they've never lost a child. Those
Right.
are wrong people. I don't care if
Mhm.
they've lost, grandma, grandpa, their cat, whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
don't,
It's so
you know,
true.
don't they can't tell you how to grieve the death of your child. And even those of us who are on this path can't tell you how to grieve the death of your child. We can tell you how we did it, and we can tell you what was normal for us. We can tell you what was normal for other people that we know about, to
Yeah.
make you feel relieved that you're not going crazy. I mean, I thought I was like early Alzheimer's or something.
Oh,
I
sure.
mean, I was just losing it.
Mhm.
I I had no grid. I didn't know. And so
Yeah,
it was a relief to know that it's okay to be a mess 3 years down the road or
that's
wherever.
right. And you do it in your own timeline. There's no linear path. There's no stages of grief for us. There's none of that. It happens when it happens, and we move through it as we move through it. The bottom line is we always move through it. You may have somebody who takes a look at this tonight, whether they're live with us right now or whether they come back to a recording later on thinking that, oh my gosh, I'm a mess. I'm not moving forward. Yes, you are. You're here. You're
Mhm.
looking at this YouTube video somewhere down the road, or you're live with us now. But that in itself means that you've got enough love and respect for yourself, and the love that lost loved one left behind for you to do this. So you're moving forward. It's tough. The whole thing is just tough. But
I yeah, I think that the moving forward, it's such a deep pain and such a deep grief that moving forward is such a deep, deep, deep work that we don't even realize it's going on. And we think we've moved ahead 2 steps and then we've gone back 5.
right.
And that might be true, but you're still moving ahead the 2. And for me, and I think a lot of parents, it's all this, it seems like it happens all of a sudden, because all of a sudden you realize one day, I didn't cry today.
Right.
I
Right.
mean,
Or I allowed myself to laugh.
yes, yes, I didn't feel guilty about laughing just now,
Right.
or it feels suddenly, but it's not. It's just such tiny increments because it is so deep.
And you take it where it comes. And if you're lucky enough to recognize it, then just be joyous that you are moving forward. They in clinical circles, they call this grief work, and that's exactly what it is. And whether you're going through somebody else's assistance with it, whether it be a counselor or clergy or something like that, you're going to have to do your own grief work, and it is no less strenuous than digging a ditch. I mean, there are both psychological and physical things that you're going to have to do to move through this that most people don't realize. This is a very, very hard task for us to move forward after the loss of someone we love so profoundly. And then, you take with you kind of the idea that, well, I'm hurting this badly because there was that love. And I would much, I told you that I had John for 16 years. I had him 16 years longer than I thought. And if God came down today and said I could have him for 16 years again and know that I was going to lose him in 16 years, would I do it again?
Mhm.
Absolutely, I would do it again. I didn't know unconditional love before I had a child. I didn't know what it was. I mean, God loved my ex-wife. I did not have that kind of unconditional love. Different with your parents and your siblings and things like that.
Mhm.
But now I can tell you from an old cop point of view, that was somebody that I would have given my life for, and
Mhm.
and that means a great deal for me.
Yeah. Let's dig into the difference of, I know we don't want to make it generic, but for the most part, it's the way it seems to work, because men and women are built differently, psychologically and emotionally. I know for me, when Becca died, it was like I was at the cemetery all the time. I
Mhm.
was crying, I
Yeah,
was pulling up pictures. That was how I was processing my grief. It
sure.
was like it and I just had to be immersed in
Mm,
everything I could
right,
about Becca. And as a husband, most husbands, it's like, you're doing that to yourself. Stop it. Just put that stuff away. If you
right.
wouldn't keep doing that to yourself. But men process as a whole, men tend to process grief differently, don't
Oh,
they?
absolutely, absolutely. And it's okay to say generic. All right. And if we look at sex or we look at gender when it comes to how we process emotions, whether it be grief or any kind of emotion for that matter, there are going to be generalities. 80% of men are going to act in a certain way, 10 to 20% are not. Same thing with women.
Hmm.
Gender is fluid. We know that. I mean, but I look at it like if I were to stick my arms out and this were my male side and this is my female side, I probably run right along in here someplace, right? Well,
Hmm.
my neighbor runs in here. My other neighbor might be across the feminine side over to here.
Hmm.
And that's not talking about sexuality or anything like that. It's just talking about the way we process things.
Hmm.
I've been at many workshops where I've talked about male versus female grief. And, I'll have somebody stand up and go, well, I never cry and my husband won't stop. Okay, well, 10 to 20% of people are not going to be, but we need that generality for what? To kind of set a watermark so we know that where we're starting from. And then we can individualize it as we work on a specific person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it also, to me, it seems like, so if the man is the one that can't keep crying, usually the woman is the counterpart, the balance, and so she's the one that's processing the grief the other way.
Do you know why?
Tell me why.
Garden of Eden.
Hmm.
You know why?
Tell me why.
Because God looked at Adam and said, you need help, right? So when he said, you need help, did he make another Adam? Did he make somebody exactly like Adam? Or did he make somebody that could do the things that Adam couldn't do?
We complete each other. It's not a
Exactly.
subservient kind of helper, it's a
No.
completion kind of helper.
The problem is, though, that when we get into something as profound as the loss of a loved one, and let's take a husband and wife, mother and father, we are now dealing with emotions that, number one, we've either never felt before, or we've certainly never felt them at levels that we're now feeling. So, number one, we're jacked up with ourselves. Okay. Number two, he or she on the opposite side is expressing things that we never saw in them before. And
Yep.
what we're looking for them is, come save me.
Right.
Okay. Well, number one, they haven't put the oxygen mask on themselves yet. And they become an odd little alien that we've never met in our life before because they're doing things that either we agree with or disagree with, don't understand, have never seen. A nice little case in point is I go back to mine where, um, I had somebody who said, come sit with me and talk about this loss. I can't stop crying. And I said, I can't stop. I have things to do. This must be done. Don't you understand this? Well, don't you understand that I need somebody to talk to because I need to talk with somebody about this? And that's the difference in between men and women. It doesn't come back to, well, there must be something wrong with me because I didn't want to sit with her and talk. Um, I'd like to be able to go back to that old person now and smack him in the head and go, you should have given her some of what she needed because you certainly asked her to give you what you needed. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we are each other's helper. And because of that, we look to the other person to come save us in a point in time where life is in such turmoil, we don't quite understand ourselves yet. And we're
Mhm.
looking at the other person, we don't quite understand them. All we know is that we're lost, confused, angry, guilty, despondent, and we have this great big soup of emotions, and the other person is now an alien. So how do we handle that, right?
Yeah.
So the first part is we go back and we take a look at, the old cliche that men don't grieve, which is, we both know that's pretty much bunk. We just do it
Right.
differently. What
Right.
most people don't realize clinically is men actually experience 2 times the emotions than a woman does on every day. You know
Wow.
that? And what's
No,
the
I did
difference?
not know that.
What's the difference?
The difference is that we let people know we're experiencing the emotions.
We do it internally. We
Yeah.
are internal processors of a lot of our emotions. Um, this happens a lot of reasons for both nature and nurture reasons, which are kind of the clinical battle that's been going on the longest as far as psychology is concerned. They've kind of come to an understanding that both nature and nurture have something to do with who we are, but they're still battling which is more dominant, which controls what. But really, it comes down to this: we lose that ability to be outwardly emotional as men somewhere along the age. Well, let me put it this way. I want you to think back of yourself as a little girl and then think back, let's go back to the age of 4 or 2 or whatever. Little boys are little brats. They're little emotional brats that hold their breath and stomp their feet and scream and let you know every emotion they are feeling when a little girl does not. She's the cool, calm little toddler, correct?
Not always, but yeah, I mean, boys are just like, ah, they're just very, yes,
80%,
very
80%.
demonstrative.
Give me my 80%. Okay.
Yes, yes,
But
yes.
at
Yeah.
around the age of 8, that shuts down. And we begin to internalize our emotions inside as males. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Because you can see
It's
that now.
just a natural thing.
It is a natural thing. And did it come from nature or did it come from my father telling me that big boys don't cry? Or do we go back to the Serengeti when men were leaving the village for months at a time, right? Hiding in bushes, repressing fear because actually they were hunting something that if they didn't do it right could eat them, right?
Yeah.
Um, Looking at other men who are coming to try to take over their village and take over the women and enslave their kids. I mean, it's been going on and on and on since the dawn of time. There are so many things that are encoded inside of us that we just naturally do by instinct. And to
And some
fight
of
them,
that is some of that the nature in a man to protect.
yes,
So,
absolutely.
I
My
mean, they
biggest
don't
problem,
want to burden us because they want to protect us from those things.
my biggest problem is that we're husband and wife and we've lost a child and you're crying and I can't stop you from crying. I can't fix what's wrong with you. My
Right.
job is to protect you. And by golly, now I've lost a child and I can't fix my wife.
Hmm.
What kind of man am I that I can't do that? That I can't be the husband that she needs?
Right. Right.
That's, these are some of the things that we go through that we have to realize I'm okay. But it's man's nature to say, I want to fix this. Transversely, it's woman's nature to want to socialize and empathize and to express those emotions because let's go back to the Serengeti again. When man went away to hunt, what did the women of the village do? They stayed behind with the kids and they gathered in what? Groups
Hmm.
to stay safe.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to a Compassionate Friends meeting this weekend. And who's there?
The women.
95% women every time, right?
Hmm.
Women are socializers. It's how they've developed over the centuries is to be far more social than men.
Hmm.
And we understand that. As long as we understand that, I've been to workshops or been to weekend conferences before where I've had women tell me every time I come to one, as soon as I walk in the door at home, my husband wants to know everything that was said. And I said, because he's not a socializer like you, but he relies on you to give him the data that he needs. Does that make sense? It's funny to watch, actually, just the
Yeah.
characteristics of what goes on. But we don't see many men at these meetings, do we?
No. How often do you find that the dad, um, because he's the protector and he wants to fix this, that he puts his own grief aside and doesn't deal with his own grief for quite some time because he's still trying to protect and fix the family and their pain and their grief?
It happens quite frequently. It truly does. And what we have to watch out for is when it becomes something that triggers complicated grief. When now he does this to the point so much that he's using it to avoid going back. Because again, there was absolutely nothing wrong with me staying busy after John passed away, preparing his services, making sure that I paid homage to who he was when I laid him to rest. All that was just, if you get this, it was an amazing release in my mind to be able to do that and focus on that. But then I had to come back to the grief. Now, if I would have had something that would have kept my mind busy, and keep in mind, I had little things beyond that that kept me busy. My gosh, I spent so much time doing woodworking in my garage after John passed that if I wouldn't have started moving forward, everything in my house would have been made in my garage. Okay. Um, but in my mind as a man, that gave me something to control.
Mhm.
Okay. I could not control the passing of my son. My son was taken from me beyond my control. And I'm a man and I want to control things. Okay. So I can go out to the garage and I can build something and I can destroy it if I want to, or I can make it beautiful if I want to. I can stop, I can start, I can do whatever. I went back to work and I went back to work and used work as an avoidance as well for a time. Okay. Keeps the mind busy, keeps the grief from making you despondent, but at the same time, it's a natural, but too much of it becomes complicated grief because we have to do what? We have to face this.
Yeah.
We can't just let it go
Yeah.
on because,
Go through it. Yeah.
and science has proved this out. The longer that I allow this to complicate itself, the heavier it's going to be when it finally,
Mhm.
and you can't stop it from coming because eventually it's going to come. So
It's
we
like
need to,
dam breaks. Yeah.
it is. It's like everything else in life. The longer you let it wait, the heavier it's going to be at the end of it. So, we'll use things that we can control. Going back to work, I had 1,200 employees when I lost John. 1,200 employees that worked under me as a director. I enjoyed going back and having control
Mm.
of something. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And more just, it's typical man things. It's how we do things.
Hmm. So men tend to process things through their minds and thinking. Women tend to process things through their emotions. And I
Mhm.
know one thing that that Dave, my husband, has shared with me is the whole, men tend to put everything in boxes. It's like
Yep.
you focus on one thing. This is my work box, this is my wife box, this is my mother-in-law box, this is my Packers box, this is my, and when Becca died, pieces of that shattered into all the boxes.
Yes, absolutely.
And so he could be at work and all of a sudden there's a piece of Becca that shattered into that box. And it's just very jarring for a man that you do lose that control, that
Sure.
it's just everywhere.
We're designed that way that a typical man, like you said, has a box for everything. There's a box for the house and a box for the car and a box for the job and a box for the
They
dog and
even have a
things like
nothing
that.
box,
Yeah,
a true nothing box.
sure. And we love it.
We
We want the
can't
nothing
understand
box.
this as a woman. There's no such thing. What are you thinking of? Nothing.
Nothing.
You can't be thinking of nothing. Men can think of nothing.
We
They have
need
a
to
nothing
think of
box.
nothing. When we are faced with a problem that we cannot solve, we will either go insane or we will sit down and grab the remote for the TV. Which would you prefer?
Oh yeah.
Sit down and it's a joyous little box. It does its wonderful things, and we need it. But a woman's mind is just the opposite. You don't have boxes because the house is attached to the car, and the car is
Everything is
attached to
connected
the
to
job. And
everything.
when when we go to bed at night, 90% of a man's brain shuts down. When
That
women
was
go to bed
so
at night,
wonderful.
75% of the brain stays active.
Yes.
You don't
Yes.
stop thinking. All right. Even at night, you do not stop thinking. Right. We're different, and we're different for a reason because God gave you to us so that you could help us. Do you know that women created domesticating animals such as cows and things like that to give us food? Women created agriculture, women creating cooking vessels and how to cook. It's just that men took all that over and took the credit for it at some time. But women are just amazing creatures that God brought along just for that reason, to help us out and allow us to take credit for a lot of what we do. It's
Hmm.
just we're different by design, and the little idiosyncrasies that make us attracted to each other normally. And you know this because you know so many couples that actually have become stronger
Hmm.
after a loss.
Yes.
But you have that knee-jerk reaction from, I'm sorry, from the psychological group and the clergy who say, watch out, you're going to end up divorced, when there is no empirical evidence of that whatsoever out there. As a matter of fact, you go to the CDC, who keeps stats on divorces, causes for divorce, and you'll see that there's stats for alcoholism, stats for spousal abuse, stats for playing the ponies too much, things like that. There's nothing the CDC has on the loss of a child causing a divorce. And
Hmm.
just the fact that they don't even mention it should tell us a lot of things.
Hmm.
So divorce is not automatic just because you've lost a child.
That should be a comfort to a lot of people.
Well, it came from there was a book. It was written called The Bereaved Parent. It was written back in the 70s, and I will get you the name of the author in a second if you allow me to scroll for a second.
Okay.
But anyway, while I'm scrolling, I'll tell you the story behind it. She was actually a reporter for a newspaper, and unfortunately, she lost her child. She wrote a book called The Bereaved Parent, extremely, extremely good book. And because her writing style was so good, she got a lot, and the information was good too. I don't want to say it was just a writing style. It was a good book all the way around. And in the book, she happened to mention that the loss of a child is going to be very difficult on a marriage. She never said divorce. She didn't say a word about it. But then, just like looking at tide coming in on a beach, after that book was released, there were so many within the clinical fields and the clergy and the everybody started talking about, be careful about divorce, be careful about divorce. I mean, I heard it within days of losing John, to be careful about divorce. When the fact is that again, and I started this off by saying most of the couples that I know, when we go to these conferences, when we go to meetings, you see couples that are that much stronger. It's because it was the differences that pulled them together and made them fall in love that carries them through a loss like this.
Hmm.
When you have a divorce after a loss like that, it's because there were underlying conditions to the marriage before the loss happened.
The
Does that
marriage
make
was
sense?
already struggling.
Yeah. So, I mean, that knee jerk reaction, be careful, you're going to end up getting divorced, should be the last thing anybody talks about because we have a helper. Both of us have a helper. I
Yes.
have a helper in a woman, and a woman has a helper in a man. It's by design.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Men tend to, like you were saying, women, we want to talk about it, and we want to get our husbands to talk about it. But for most men, the only reason they want to talk about an issue is usually to another man that they think can help them fix the issue.
Sure.
It's
Because
it's not
we
just
want
to
it
talk
fixed.
about it. It's just I'm talking to you because I think you can help me fix this problem.
Right.
And the death of a child isn't a problem that can be fixed.
No. But we are problem solvers in our very DNA. It's who we are. If you look at a man that's just done a golf shot and it was a bad golf shot, he'll spend 20 swings redoing that shot, not even hitting the ball again, just trying to think how he could have fixed
Mm.
that shot, even though the shot's already been done. We Our mind just thinks that way. We are problem solvers. Why did that happen? I went through a bad period of what I call false guilt and false anger after John died, because at first there was no real explanation for it. And what happens when there's no real explanation? I can't fix it unless I do what? Unless I blame it on myself. And I can fix that because it must have been me. It must have been something I said, must have been something I did. It must have been the food that I was feeding. It was something that caused his heart to fail that nobody can tell me right now what it was. So by golly, it had to be me, right? And that's a trap. And nobody needs to fall in that. Everybody needs to sit down and go, there's nothing I said, did, or didn't do, or didn't say that had anything to do with the loss of my child. Um, I was lucky. I was not going after a lawsuit, although people thought that I was, but I spent $4,000 on an independent group of doctors to pull all of his files from that surgery. And the conclusion to that was it was his time. And I felt a great deal of relief knowing that, if that makes sense to you, that it was his time. So,
Isn't it interesting how so much of it seems to be perspective?
mhm,
Because we can look at that either as something that we get angry about
yeah,
or something that gives us relief and peace.
sure. And I think what we have to be careful of is anger is a natural part of this, and should never be repressed. That is far different from what I call false anger. All right. False anger is very destructive, very nasty. True anger, again, something that we must go through and we must express in this, can be very beneficial in a lot of ways. Think back to Mothers Against Drunk Driving and the anger that a mother had and how that has changed us socially so much just because of her anger, right?
Mhm.
Um, False anger, false guilt can do so much to damage us because we do want to blame what we can on this, even if it's us. Or I was angry at the hospital. I was darn angry at the hospital for a long time. Do you know I went back and sat on the board of advisors for that hospital for 3 years
Mm.
before I left the area? Um, that was my walk over the threshold as a way, but I was also honored that they invited me to come sit on the board. Um, I wasn't angry at them anymore. I knew that they'd done everything they could. And I was blessed to have them in a place like that where, for 16 years, they did help take care of them. So,
Mhm. Yeah. So the area of communication, we know that it is important for a husband and wife to communicate. It doesn't matter what the marital issue is,
mhm,
because that's one of the top reasons of divorce is
it
the
is.
breakdown of communication,
Mhm.
breakdown communication of finances, communication of just whatever life. So how do you help couples find that balance where she wants to talk, she wants him to talk, he doesn't want to talk, they're both in a world of grief and that suffocating darkness. So how do you suggest or help couples find that balance of, yes, you do need to talk some about this.
By asking him to repeat the very thing you just said.
Mhm.
Yes, you do need to talk some, usually to him. Usually, if you dig down deep inside somebody and let them know, look, this is all about the love you have for each other, and you are not a talker. You're not somebody who expresses your emotions, but she's not the one to be quiet. You're not talk about her feelings. Um, there's got to be some give and take here because you do love each other. You've got to come to each other's rescue, and you have to realize you have to communicate about this. Men have a whole different, we were talking about how men respond to certain things. I always talk about that. There was a TV skit on one time where a husband came home and told his wife that Larry at the office was getting a divorce. And she said, oh, she goes, what happened? Was he cheating? Was she cheating? He goes, I don't know. He just came up and said he was getting a divorce. I said, are you okay? And he said, yeah. In the story, I'm done. He said he was okay. That's kind of the guy thing. That's how we do it. I came home from being a cop every night and didn't talk about what I did every day. It was a different world that I didn't want to talk about. I wasn't silent, but at the same time, I didn't want to talk about that because they were emotional things at times. If I expose the wrong emotion to you, it could be a problem for me. So I sometimes I hide them inside. You know what I mean? We talk about the really the things that people are most scared of, right? What are the things that scare us the most in life? And most people say public speaking. What you and I are doing right now, right? They say public speaking. But the biggest phobia for a woman is what? Creepy crawly things, right? So
Yes.
you guys, you guys get the really, kind of shallow thing of you're most afraid of creepy crawly things. Do you know what a man is most afraid of?
Hmm.
You're going to find out that I'm not everything that I tell you that I am.
Mm.
That's a male's biggest phobia. And you could stack on top of that that I'm not going to find out that I'm everything that I tell other people that I am. The ego thing, right? EGO, edging God out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really comes down to fear. If I say too much, then somebody might find out that I'm not everything that I purport myself to be. Now, you got to dive into that and how deep is the love, right?
Mm.
So, if I could say anything to that, a man and woman has to look at each other and say the very same thing. How do we communicate? Do it. Communicate. Start. Do something. Meet each other in the middle, right? Give him his man cave. Come out and sit with her beside the couch for 5 minutes the first time. At least recognize that each one of you needs something from the other. And I know that you're each dealing with a certain bit of pain, not certain bit of pain, your own pains yourself, right? So that's one of the biggest problems is we're still so much dealing with our own pains inside that we've never felt before. And it's hard to try to come to the rescue of somebody else. Even for that man that said, I can't stop her for crying, I can't fix her.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Trying to fix her.
Yeah.
Um, I think you can tell me this yourself, but I mean, to me, there's not many women out there that want a man to fix something for her. She wants to fix it herself. She just wants to tell a man about it, right? Right? She'll
Well,
fix.
yeah, I guess in some ways that would be true.
Yeah, and it happens quite a bit. I did a workshop, a men and women's workshop, I think in Fairfax, Virginia, one year, where, and not to bring up the fact that he was Latin, other than the fact that he told me he was Latin. He says he's got his wife beside him. He goes, "I'm a Latin man," and he goes, "I can't fix her, and I'm supposed to fix her. She's my wife. I'm supposed to fix everything for her." And she's looking at him with those eyes the whole time. And I said, first off, she doesn't want you to fix things. She wants you to shut up and listen while she tells you what she's going to do to fix her problem. Right. And
And,
so I
and
looked around the room and I said, "Women, anybody in here want your man to fix them?" And the whole room went, "No." So that's your first lesson. Don't try to fix her. She will fix herself, but she wants to talk to you about it. And if you won't sit down and talk to her, she will find somebody to talk to, whether it's a nice peer-to-peer support group out there, whether it's a counselor out there, whether it's clergy. She's going to express it. But guess what, guy? You're her best friend. She's going to come to you first and try to confide in you. Can you not spend 5 minutes the first time? Because the next time it'll be 10 minutes. The next time it'll be 15 minutes and you get used to it. My dad used to tell me about my mom. He goes, that sometimes she could be like a hurricane. And I said, yeah. And he goes, I had to realize that sometimes I had to just stand up, put my face in that wind and let her blow. And I said, okay, I got it.
that's from some TV show. I can't remember what it is, but it's like my husband and my boys are like, lay down, play dead.
But it still all comes back. I mean, truly, truly, we were made this way on purpose. And we're attracted to each other because of this. We
Mm-hmm.
go through everyday life, and a lot of times the hardships of everyday life bind us, and we rely on each other, and we cling to each other. And then the biggest trauma of our life comes along, and it's just difficult to realize that we're still the same people who rely on each other, but we have to figure out ourselves first. Even if it takes 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 months, hang in there. There's a reason why you met each other, reason why you came together, the reason why you married, reason why you had a kid.
Right, right. It's interesting. I always get a kick out of how we're so good at saying there's no wrong way to grieve. I mean, we know that, we say that until it comes to our spouse, and
Right.
then you're doing it wrong. You need to be doing it like me.
Right. Well, and we naturally try to look to each other because I had the same thing from my spouse. It didn't I love my son as much because I wasn't as despondent as she was. And that triggered me to say, well, again, I'm not crying, so maybe I do have a problem. Maybe the fact that I'm not, and I did cry. I just don't want you to think that I didn't cry. But I mean, I wasn't debilitated. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Where she was. There were days, weeks that would go by where, she was, and that's what she needed to do. And I realized that. I, on the other hand, just had to stay busy. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm not like her, then there
Hmm.
must be something wrong with me. So
Yeah.
I had to
So,
get over that.
like for us, a lot of us, like I was saying way at the beginning when we were first starting to talk,
Mhm.
digging into everything and the crying and the, I just have to be with, see pictures and all this stuff. And
Sure.
to me, what I seem to have discovered is that for a man, all of that kind of stuff is distracting to them for their grief.
Right. It is because it processes a whole different way inside. It truly does. Again, there's problems that we can't fix. We're going to go to our nothing box for a while. And you brought that up. You know about the nothing box. And I told you we go to the nothing box when there's things that we can't fix.
Hmm.
Um, in everyday life, even without losing somebody, every man's going to go sit on the couch and flip through the channels on TV because there's a problem. I guarantee if he's doing that, there's something in his mind that he can't resolve. It allows us a chance to kind of, for lack of a better term, let our thoughts take over. It's like that magic thing in the shower. And I wrote this in my first book. The thoughts that I have in the shower, I could have solved world hunger sometimes. I come up with the most inane
Right,
thoughts
right.
in the shower, just, oh my God, why didn't I think of that before? We go to the nothing box and our mind starts to think and we don't even notice it. It's still trying to solve problems. We're just not listening, if that makes sense, right?
Hmm.
So now you want to introduce other media, pictures, and talking about it, and this and that. And we're like, look, I'm in this box right now. I can't talk about this because I'm in this box. You agree?
Hmm.
Right.
Well,
Right. You said
it's
yourself, we
kind
got
of
our
funny you
boxes.
said you understand what I'm saying, and I shake my head yes, and it's like only because I don't understand it because that's not my makeup, but I understand to the sense that that's how men are as a
Right.
whole.
And
That's how they're different.
it's no indication of lack of love, lack of respect. It's who we're wired to be inside by both nature and nurture. I mean, some of it was the way we were brought up. You went through your life, I'm sure, as a child, hearing that women don't act that way and this and that. Men went through the same thing. Don't cry. Women cry, not little boys. Things like that. Um, but
How
yeah,
can I ask you? How does a man? Is there a way that a man can figure out? You had mentioned it earlier, the difference between, is it because that's not my makeup, that's just not where I am right now in my grief, or is it because I have been taught men don't cry and I need to figure out how to break through that, because that can be a hardness, can't it, that needs to
sure
be
it can.
broken through for the grief.
Absolutely. And it depends on how much you value a change in your life. Okay. Just because we've been programmed a certain way doesn't mean it will stay this way. Now, this goes to the far extremes of it. So I don't want to get too far out there, but I was a Marine. I went through Marine Corps boot camp, Parris Island, South Carolina, right? Arguably the most horrendous thing that anybody can go to. And in 4 years in the Marine Corps, I was taught to crawl on my belly, get a rifle, kill, 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 kill. Well, after 4 years of getting out of the Marine Corps, was that a value to me anymore? Was that a value to my life?
Hmm.
So I was able to deprogram myself for that just by realizing that was not a value to my life anymore. So if a man or a woman comes to a point where they have a characteristic inside it, and I don't find it pleasing to me or rewarding to me that I don't cry when I'm watching a Hallmark movie, I can change, but I have to make an observation of it first. In order for it to leave my subconscious, it's got to do what? It's got to come to light, right? And it comes to light by coming from the subconscious to the conscious mind.
Hmm.
And once it does that, it's out in the sunlight. And yes, it's not going to come completely out of the conscious the first time. It's not a light switch. You can't snap it and make it change.
Hmm.
It's going to take a concerted effort over time, but it also takes a desire and a dedication. Does that make sense? I want to be somebody who cries at Hallmark movies, right? So every time I see one, I'm gonna put Visine in my eyes, and eventually I'll get there. Okay, even though it's the same
I want
script.
to
And
see how she
you know,
does it because she
yeah,
cries through all of them all the time.
but yeah, there are many things, and there are characteristics that we have that are good, and we want to bring them out even more. I was talking about the Marine Corps and what I was taught. There were a number of things I was taught in the Marine Corps that don't have to do with all that grungy stuff I talked about, crawling around on the floor. I wasn't allowed as a Marine to walk out into town in a plain white t-shirt. Well, that was a few decades ago, and I still can't wear a plain white t-shirt. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't see how that brought any harm to my life, so I did not try to get that out of my head, right?
Uh-huh.
I didn't need to make. We were taught that we don't carry umbrellas, and the only time that we carried an umbrella was when we carried it over the head of a woman while we walked, right? I
Mm-hmm.
can't even play a game of golf with an umbrella in my bag. It's not in my brain housing group, but that did me no harm. I didn't need to leave that behind. I didn't need to deprogram that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, if there are characteristics that we recognize about ourselves, we can change those. Again, there has to be a vested desire to do it, and a desire to realize it's not going to be a light switch. It's not going to be an instant thing that you change who you've been for decades.
And I
Or
think
uh,
part of it is the motivation. Is it
yeah,
is it because everybody else thinks you should be crying?
right. Or let's go back to the husband and wife. The fact that the husband won't give the wife 5 minutes of she needs, or let's flip it around. Let's flip genders where we do have that 10% of the male who cries and the wife doesn't want to sit down with him. Either way, somebody has to say, you know what? A good husband would sit down. A good wife would sit down, and I need to change that in myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give it that 5 minutes this time, right? And 5 minutes turns into 10 minutes next time and 15 minutes next time. And pretty soon it becomes who you are. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
all these things that we learn about ourselves, and this is kind of self psychology, but we can't tell ourselves we must do something or else, right? Because then we're going to do it once and we're never going to do it again. But
Mm-hmm.
if we tell ourselves there's a good reason to do it, and we do it and we see the good outcome of that,
Yeah.
now it becomes an urge to do it again,
Yeah.
right? So as a man, if you want to sit down and allow yourself, even if you got to put your face in that hurricane and stand against the wind and listen for 10 minutes while she just cries, there's a great outcome to it. You'll see a deeper love afterwards, and you'll want to do it more and more and more. And guess what? You're changing a characteristic about yourself that you didn't like before.
Mm-hmm.
But know
It
that it's
really
tough
isn't
to do.
changing the way you grieve. It's accepting and being there for the other one the way they grieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and understanding why, because we don't understand women half the time. Men have no idea
We
what.
don't understand ourselves half the time.
No, and that's what and you listen to people like John Gray and things like that. They really do have a lot to say about our mindset versus a woman's. Where we don't realize that we would actually get more what he calls points from a woman if we were to give her one rose for 12 days. Each day she got one rose versus one day with 12 roses. Right?
Mhm.
That makes sense? We
Yeah.
don't think that way. We think,
Mhm.
shoot, I just gave you 12 roses. I'm good for 4 or 5 months now. I don't need to do anything for you, right? That's not the way women think. They would rather have one rose every day for 12 days than 12 roses on one day,
Because
right?
that means you thought of me every day.
We don't get that. We don't understand. I gave you 12 roses. Okay. I'm good for a long time.
Right.
So, but
For
it's who we are. And again, it's who we are by design. We just have to go back to realizing it's that wonderfulness of differentiality. We were brought together because God did say Adam needs a helper, and I'm going to have her do things that he can't do. Right?
yeah, yeah, and the other way around.
Yeah.
So for women who are struggling with feeling like their husband isn't grieving because they don't see the tears, they won't talk about it, that kind of a thing. One thing I guess I want to express to some of these moms is your husband probably is crying,
Hmm.
just not where you can see it,
Hmm.
and he's not telling you about it.
Did you want to mention the title of my very first book? Sometimes I cry in the shower. Is that where you're going with this?
Well, yeah, yeah, because to them it, well, you tell me why. I mean, to me it seems like it makes them feel vulnerable, it makes
Mhm.
them feel weak, it makes them feel like they're not protecting. So why is it that men don't want to let us know that I have cried?
I think it comes down to the obvious reasons. I mean, we have a certain pride and ego about us that we've got to break. There are many men out there that are developing now the ability to cry and need to at the right times, but it's just the way that we were brought up. We were brought up, big boys don't cry. We were brought up to hide our feelings, to keep our emotions inside. Um, And,
And I'll
there
tell
were
you, if
times.
both me and my husband were the blubbering criers that I am, we would.
Yeah, it's a
It'd
great
be
thing. I
such
would
a
have loved
mess.
to have been able to
It
cry. It
really
wouldn't
would be
bother me a
such a
bit.
mess.
I keep telling men now, you know, if you're worried about what somebody's going to think about you because you're crying, you've already been through one of the worst events that any human could ever go through. Are you really concerned about what somebody else thinks about you? Your husband is probably at that point where he already knew that. I don't care what people think about me right now.
Hmm.
There's probably a lot of people, women included, that can understand what I went back to work. Even though I was a number two in the company, I was pretty dangerous with my job because at that point, as far as I was concerned, I had nothing to lose. My boss could tell me something, I'd be like, all right, whatever. I
Hmm.
don't care. Fire me. What else? How are you going to hurt me now? I've lost my son.
Hmm.
Um, Men cry. Now, people ask me, how can I get up on stage and talk about my pain? Judge me. Go ahead, please say something about me. Nothing can hurt me. I've lost my child. Okay.
Hmm.
I've been through the worst of anything. So, it's definitely a curse there too. So
Yep. Yep. Well, we're wrapping things up. I haven't seen any
me.
questions come up, but we haven't. Yeah, that was fast, wasn't it?
We killed an hour.
Yeah, just
I didn't
about.
even I didn't even sing yet.
Oh, all right.
Oh, trust
Song
me,
and dance from Ron Kelly. This is a first.
that you don't want. It's not Gene Kelly, so no, you don't want that.
Okay.
Not Gene Kelly.
Uh,
I know we're wrapping up. There is a concept out there. I want 10 seconds to talk about
yes, please.
my grief case. All right.
Yeah,
I want
yeah.
everybody to realize that you're carrying a grief case. It's just like a briefcase. Inside, there are little manila folders filled with all your grief, right? You got this briefcase when you experienced your loss. I got mine from somebody that I didn't know at the time and somebody I've never seen again in a hospital. I will carry my briefcase with me until I see John again. I can't put it down. I can't leave it behind. But inside are all those folders with each of those individual emotions inside of it. Get into those folders and straighten them out. It'll make your grief case so much less heavy. Get rid of the false grief and the false anger and the things that don't belong and put your files and folders where they're supposed to be. And pretty soon you'll do what I do. And I walk around and I open up my grief case and I show everybody, here's my John. Okay. So think of it like a grief case. Think of your emotions inside. And like again, pretty soon it's empty enough where you can just throw in your flip flops and some suntan lotion and go have some fun. Right. Peace and
Good.
purpose. Right.
That's good. That's good.
Is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. And pray about how to go through those files, huh? Because for each
Yeah.
one of us it's different. And we need God to show us what those false things are, because we do have so many false beliefs as grieving parents.
We do.
And believing a lie is just as powerful as believing the truth. But the truth
or
sets
or believing a false perception, and
yes.
there's a lot of that because our emotions are so swirling while we're going through this, and sometimes we need to just sit down and stop and take a break even from grief. I mean,
Hmm.
if I could say anything at all before you leave, breaks are important, especially in grief. The most beautiful piece of classical music would be nothing but droning nasty noise without pauses between the notes, right? Take a break. Let your grief take a break for even 30 seconds, for 2 minutes, for a day.
Hmm.
Take a break and recharge. It'd
Yeah,
be
Ron,
a beautiful
yeah.
piece of music.
We give you permission to take a break from the grief. It's okay. You're
It
not
is.
betraying your child by taking a break. You need to take a break from your grief, and it's okay to do something fun.
And nobody should ever think that when we talk about moving forward, it means leaving anything behind.
It's
Okay.
impossible.
You
Yeah.
don't move forward and leave the loss of your child behind, the love of your child behind, the thoughts of your child, none of that. Moving forward does not mean that. My God, there is more of John in me right now than there is me. Okay. um, because I move forward. And I
Mhm.
wouldn't be like this if I didn't move forward.
And our love for our child continues to increase, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And
It's
you know
crazy.
what? We
Yeah.
give it to everybody else now, right?
We what?
We give it to everybody else.
Yes. Yes. Yep. 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 It becomes a beautiful thing that warms us. And
Well, it's not that we're still not giving them the unconditional love that we felt before they passed, but we also need to physically show it. And when they're gone, we think of different ways to put it out there. And we put it out
Yep.
there with our fellow bereaved. We put it out in a number of different ways. We put it out in our writings. We put it out in our podcasts. All this is love. This, what you do because you know unconditional love. You still feel it. You still give it out to our lost loved ones, but then you give it out to each other now. Maybe if you're like me, trust me, I was, like I said, I was a jarhead. I was a cop. I was actually a federal agent for a while.
Mm,
I didn't much care for people. I lived on an ego. I had no compassion for anybody.
mm.
Then my son was born with a bad heart. Then my son died. Life for me, uh, there is no gift that we get from grief, but if this were the closest thing, it would be what it's done to my life, what God has brought as far as compassion and understanding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's almost like our life gets turned upside right.
Bingo. Very good. I like that.
Hmm.
Can I steal that? I like that.
Sure thing.
Good. Good.
Yeah,
Good. Good.
yeah. I mean, it takes a while to feel that way, but eventually it does seem like the things, the people we used to be, and how the love for our child that we still have
Yeah.
changes
And
us.
say that again, please. It takes,
It turns us upside right.
no, but it takes a while to get there,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Mm.
Don't
It is a
stop.
process. Yeah.
Don't stop. You hear the stories about somebody who planted a bulb and they waited 2 weeks and they saw nothing. So they dug it up and they didn't realize that they were just getting ready to break through the surface of the ground. Just be patient with yourself. All right.
Mhm.
There's so many people right now that don't want to move forward. I don't want to. I don't want to.
Mhm.
You kind of have to. It's God's plan. I
Mhm.
always say that I took a lot of solace in knowing that when John was sitting up there making his plans with God to come down, they both looked at me and said, "There's a good guy you can go spend 16 years with," right?
Mhm.
But then that also made me realize that he had his own plan with God, and I'm not privy to that plan. I don't know exactly what it was or who else he touched as a child while he was down here, and he touched a lot of other kids. So you
Mhm.
know, we all have our plan.
Yep. And they're all in God's hands. Best place they can be.
Yeah.
So, well, Ron, how can people get a hold of you if they want to connect with you? And usually they'll find you under R. Glenn Kelly, right?
Yes, ma'am. I write all my books under R. Glenn Kelly. It's R and then GLENNKELLY because R. Kelly was taken, so I didn't want to use that name.
Ah,
It's a very bad joke that somebody's going to get mad at. But rglennkelly.com. My phone number's on there. You can text me. You can call me. My email address is on there. I've got a YouTube page out there, which is also under rglennkelly.com.
oh, what was that one video that you did that I shared that was so funny? Oh my
Was it
goodness.
snarky things
Yes,
we
the
say to
snarky. Yes, people have to
snarky things we say? Oh, what is the title? Snarky things we say to well wishers, right?
look that up. People, look that up. It is
Yeah,
fun.
you should. That was pretty good. That was one where we got to say back to people when they said, I know exactly how you feel because my
The
dog died.
things we want to say that we hold our tongue
We hold our tongues. So
most of the time.
I tell people is you just have to realize that people don't say things out of malice. They say things because
Yeah.
unfortunately we're taught to come to the comfort of somebody that's in distress, and
Hmm.
we just can't help saying something. We just don't know what to say. So God has allowed us to say something without knowing what to say, and it never comes out right. So it comes out as in, I lost my Aunt Shirley 3 weeks or 3 years ago, so I'm right there with you. It's like,
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep.
this is
Yep.
my kid, but you can
That,
walk
that
away.
Yeah, that's a good video. It's a fun one to watch. And Ron, also, I'll just let everybody who's watching know, Ron has also been a guest on my podcast. And on that one, we talked about grief in the workplace.
Yes.
And so let's see, it's episode 9. It was a real early one.
Mhm.
So anyone who's watching, if you want to hear what Ron has to say about grief in the workplace, it's actually one of our top podcasts that people have listened to.
Very good.
So, yeah, so just go to gpshope.org, look at the podcast, find episode 9, and you'll be able to hear Ron share on the podcast about grief in the workplace.
And that one was directed towards the employers, but you and I talked about it from an employee standpoint. But the book itself is written for the employers. Right now, I'm writing the next one, which is taking your grief case to work,
Mm,
which is for the employee. And I should
okay.
have that done in 3 to 4 months.
All right. So, yep, everybody check out Ron, and he's got lots of good stuff, and check out
Oh,
his books. And it's been really good connecting, reconnecting, and having
oh,
you here.
so
This is
good
a
seeing you
really good
again.
talk.
I'm glad you're well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So, all right. And also be sure to check out GPS Hope. So just go to gpshope.org and you'll find lots of resources and support and things there for you as well. And so we'll say goodbye to everyone watching, and hopefully we'll catch you on another video.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Ron.